So hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on cyber attacks with physical consequences, the threat report of 2024. We are going to talk about the Waterfall and ICSStrive Threat Report for 2024, which is going to cover the incidents that impacted OT in some capacity from the past year, 2023. Joining us to talk about the report is Andrew Ginter, our VP of Industrial Security here at Waterfall, Greg Hale, the founder and editor of ISSSource and ICSStrive, and Rees Machtemes, a director of Industrial Security at Waterfall and the lead researcher of this report that we're about to discuss. A couple of notes before we get started. This is a recorded session, and we're going to email a recording to you after this is over. You might get yesterday or today's recording, depending on which one we end up editing. So in case you see slightly different faces there, don't be alarmed. We will have a time for a Q&A summit for your questions at the end of the call. So if something comes into your mind, or if you have a question that pops in about something someone's talking about, please right away. You don't have to wait till the end. Put the question in the chat, and then at the Q&A session at the end, we'll get to everybody's questions, hopefully, or at least the ones that we have time for. If you would like to provide us with some feedback on this webinar, tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like. There's going to be a form at the end of the webinar, which you could fill out to provide that information. And also, if you hear something that we talk about that you think might be a good fit for what you do, you could request to have a Waterfall rep contact you directly and speak about what it is you need and how we might be able to help with that. So that's my intro. My name is Jonathan. I'm going to turn the stage over to Rees to get everything started. Rees, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that excellent introduction. We're here today to talk about our new 2024 threat report. And as the lead researcher, I wanted to start off and discuss how this third annual report that we've put out works. When we compile this report, we put in lots of great incidents. And how do we come up with these incidents? Well, we're always looking for incidents that are deliberate attacks. So not omissions, not somebody accidentally pushing a button on a control system or site. These are deliberate attacks, cyber attacks on operational technology and industrial control systems. Second, we look for ones that have a physical consequence. So it's not enough that there was a near miss or that maybe something might have gone down or that systems were impacted. We look at only ones that have had a physical effect on the operations of an industrial site. So yes, let's talk about those industries and those sites that we count. We look at certain focus industries, and frankly, these are industries with what you consider some kind of control system, PLCs, HMIs, physical operations. So that would include industries such as building automation, smart buildings, manufacturing, both discrete and process. So not only chemical processes that end up creating a product, but discrete components that are assembled into a larger whole, like in automobiles. We include heavy industry. This includes things like metals and mining and critical industrial infrastructures. So things like transport, rail, aircraft, airplanes, airports, and things like the power and oil and gas that you depend on for your everyday life. And the fourth most important thing that we look at is these must be incidents in the public record. It does us no good to hear about incidents that were told to us in confidence or that were kept secret, where we cannot discuss the details. We're looking for incidents in the public record that you can go and look to as well. And, please trust us, but let's just say that you don't. You can go to the Appendix A at the end of our report and look at every incident that we've added to our report and verify for yourself the details. And we encourage you to do so. And Greg, maybe I'll pass it over to you to talk a little bit about the incidents and the repositories we looked at.
Sure. Thanks, Rees. First, we started ICSStrive in 2021, knowing incidents were growing and they were going to continue to rise, and the industry needed some kind of database to see what was going on. And while we are talking about OT cyber attacks with physical consequences in this report. ICSStrive reports on more than just physical consequences. We also report on incidents and near misses and across the industry and even in some other related industries as well. And we have well over, well, just under 1,200 incidents in the database dating back for years, and the numbers obviously just keep growing. So it's one of those things where we're finally out there, or we're out there researching stories for ISS source, and we're reporting on it for the website, but also reporting on it for ICSStrive.
Yes, and one last thing before we move on is anybody interested in the report, please navigate to waterfall-security.com/2024-threat-report. You can request a copy. Please do so. We'd very much appreciate it, and we hope you like the report.
Okay, so let's have a look at what's actually in the report. This is a chart out of the report. Again, the criteria that Rees indicated. How many attacks were there in 2010? We have data in the appendix in the report all the way back to 2010. How many attacks were there in 2010 that were in the public record with physical consequences in heavy industry, deliberate cyber attacks? There was one. It was Stuxnet. In 2011, there was nothing. There was a lot of attacks. This was the era of dark energy and Dragonfly. They were stealing information from OPC servers. No physical consequences. There were 2 in 2012. There was none in 2013, and so on. For the whole decade, we bounced around between 0 and 5. The problem, the word I'll use is theoretical. Forward-looking industry was worried. Governments were worried. The man on the street was going, "Why are we talking about this?" Since the turn of the decade, we've seen a state change. We've gone from theoretical to real and growing. 2019 there was 5. The next year there was 18. The year after there was 23. The year after there was 57. This year there was 68. It's a noisy data set, but it seems to be roughly doubling every year, give or take. How many doublings will it take before we're all in very serious trouble? This is a disturbing trend.
Exactly, Andrew. In fact, this year in 2023, we concluded and we found 68 incidents in over 500 industrial and critical infrastructure sites. So that means that as in previous years, some incidents are impacting multiple sites. And after doing a little bit of statistics and a bit of math, I'll spare you the boring details, we've come up with a nearly doubling figure. Why do we say nearly doubling? Well, because the calculation after applying a compound annual growth style growth factor formula to our data set shows us that we have 1.92 times year over year growth. So this is pretty much doubling year over year. So this is a form of exponential growth. So compound annual growth factor, for those people that know a little bit of math, ends up being exponential growth where the time factor is 1 year, okay? And this compound annual growth, you can look at this in several different ways. This formula is often used in finance for calculating compound interest in an investment and growth of an investment over time. It's also used in other areas in science and math, like bacterial growth and viral internet memes follow this kind of trend. Moore's law, in fact, to predict CPU speed doubling every year is the same kind of formula. And one of the things that makes this formula unique is that until the initial conditions change, you will not see a reduction in this growth. So, for example, the best example is a bacterial growth in vitro in a petri dish. It will continue doubling until it exhausts the food supply, until the initial conditions change. And one of the things that has occurred is that we see that this factor is slightly less than the prediction that we made last year. So it's still doubling year over year. It's still increasing, but that rate of growth has changed slightly this year. And again, we look only at OT incidents. So for a little bit more information on why that might have slowed slightly, I'd like to bring in Greg. Greg, do you have anything to say about how this has changed?
Yes, thanks, Rees. It was when you talk about physical consequences, one of the in the OT area, one of the things you have to think about is the ransomware. And ransomware is still the top attack approach in the industry. However, the attackers' tactics are seemingly changing where they are, for the most part, not encrypting systems and files and demanding payment for a decryption key, but instead are stealing data and threatening to release it until they receive a payment. Now, this change in approach does not necessarily force down systems where the encrypting of a system could do just that. So if more victims decide not to pay under this new attack scenario, which is one trend we're seeing as we report on some of these cases, then we might get back to where attackers end up encrypting systems again, and that method could cause more physical consequences.
Yeah, and let me jump in there. Greg, I worry that you might have overstated this here. It's not true that all ransomware groups are only stealing data and no longer encrypting systems. Some ransomware attacks encrypt systems, some don't. The fraction that don't seems to be increasing. I don't believe for a second that the fraction of ransomware attacks that encrypt systems, I don't believe for a second that's ever going to go to zero. And when that fraction stabilizes, when this change in tactics, whatever ransomware groups decide for which kinds of victims they're going to encrypt and for which kinds of victims they don't, once they stabilize that decision process, you're going to see ransomware attacks with that are encrypted with physical consequences starting to increase at, again, roughly the same rate as we see ransomware attacks in the overall world increase, which last I saw from the reports from outfits like Microsoft was running at about 70% compound growth per year. So I see this stabilizing and returning to 18 months.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew.
We're looking at we're talking about ransomware here, and these are types of attacks. And like I said, well, ransomware is still the top attack method in the OT sector. But we're also seeing attackers learning from and using nation state types of tactics, techniques, and procedures, which brings the sophistication level up a few notches. But as we talked about ransomware, I also want to talk about something else, and that's within the attack type chart that we see at the bottom of the slide. I find it interesting that the unknown attack is so large. And why is that? I mean, it tells me a few things, one of which is victims are just not revealing what type of attack they are suffering. I mean, it's just leave that anonymous type of attack method is out there, and it's it can be kind of confusing.
I agree, Greg. This is the first year we've seen such a large portion of our statistics with unknowns. In the past, most of the time, these kind of details have been revealed. There's many changes. One is more reporting and regulatory requirements on organizations, especially in the private sector, that publicly traded companies now being forced to reveal by governments all around the world. It started predominantly in the United States, with the Security and Exchange Commission now requiring publicly traded organizations to publish more details, but still organizations face all kinds of risks with revealing this information, including, worrying about whether they'll become victims of attack again if they reveal too much, but also legal and other financial risks. I mean, the lawsuits right now that we see in the industry are increasing because of the fact that consumers are affected by these kinds of attacks indirectly, after companies suffer them. So there's a lot changing there. That being said, we still do know quite a bit about these attacks. And so whenever we know, we have put it. Whenever we don't, we say that as well. And so the statistics that you see here are always reported on what we do know. Ratios, for example. Moving on slightly about other changes in the attack types and threat actors. Another change we've seen this year in 2023 is a steady rise in the ratio of attackers that are hacktivists. So ransomware, in terms of the portion of the pie, is decreasing slightly to about 80% this year of attacks, where it used to be 90% and higher in the past. And now the hacktivist attacks are rising about 5% a year. So the number that we've seen trend over time, in 2020, there were 0 hacktivist attacks. And every year since then, increasing steadily 5% out of the proportion of all attacks. Why is this important? Hacktivists aren't motivated by money. They're motivated by things like, political and passionate motivations. They tend to target critical infrastructure. And we're also seeing more nation state attacks rising. It's a smaller percentage of the pie, but those are also rising in conjunction. Andrew, did you have anything you want to say about
this? So let me jump in here and sort of step back for just a second. This is the first year where we've done this kind of call it attribution, and not in terms of the threat actor, but in terms of the nature of the attack. This was the single most common question we got last year about the last year's threat report was what fraction of attacks hit OT directly and what fraction were responsible for sort of indirect impacts on OT. And so, Rees and his team did the research. And the charts you see at the bottom are charts of everything that happened since 2010. There's other charts in the report if you're just interested in last year, but this is everything since 2010. As Greg said, there's a big chunk of unknown, but within the known, there's sort of 3 large segments. There are indirect attacks. It's at the top of the legend there if you squint. The indirect, and what that means is the bad guys got into the IT network. They never got into the OT network. Yet the business decided to shut OT down because they were worried that the attack might leak from the IT network into the OT network. The textbook example is Colonial. The CEO testified under oath. The bad guys got into the IT network. There was no evidence they could see of the bad guys in the OT network, but the OT network is safety critical. And so, the supervisor on shift made the call in less than an hour of being notified that IT had gone down, made the call in less than an hour that they had to shut down OT because they were worried. The second sort of big chunk, these are sort of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, roughly. These are, I'm rounding here, back of the envelope. The second big chunk is indirect shutdowns, or call it dependencies. The bad stuff got into IT, encrypted a whole bunch of IT stuff, crippled the IT network, and we had to shut down OT because it turned out that physical operations, or maybe the OT automation itself, maybe other aspects of physical operations depended on some of the crippled services on the IT network. The textbook example there is in NotPetya. Maersk shipping went down, not because the ships were impacted. The ships could navigate safely into port. There was no problem there. Not because the cranes in the ports were impacted. The cranes could take the containers off of the ships, no problem. It went down because the container tracking system in the IT network was crippled. And when the cranes took the containers off the ships and put them onto the waiting trucks, nobody could tell the trucks where to take these containers. There was a dependency. And the third category is, of course, that OT systems are affected directly by the attack, either by the bad guys getting in and manipulating them, or sometimes by the bad guys getting into the IT network, crippling a bunch of stuff on the IT network. Oops, it turns out that the IT network and the OT network are the same thing. There isn't a firewall, and so you've crippled a bunch of the OT servers too. So, it's roughly one third in the attacks that we can tell, and there's some corner cases in the report as well, but that's the big fish.
Okay, we're the discrete manufacturing sector was the hardest hit in terms of attacks this year, followed by transportation and process manufacturing in that order. However, over 50% of last year's incidents had an impact on process and discrete manufacturing operations, most often causing production shutdowns, work stoppages, and/or shipping delays, as Andrew was kind of just discussing. Meanwhile, transportation continues to be a target for attackers, as it was in last year's report as well. Last year, transportation was the top industry that was hit. This year, it's number 2, but it's still a big area that's under attack.
Yes, absolutely, Greg. Other critical industrial infrastructures were also hit, including the electric sector. The one here about Sector CERT we're going to talk about later. This one's actually a near miss. So it is not reflected in this chart, but everybody asks about it. So it's here, so we can talk about it. Water treatment, there were a couple low impact hits. So again, sometimes this might be a surprise to people. Keep in mind, we only count incidents that cause physical consequences. So there were lots of attacks on water in the last year. However, only 2 of them caused physical consequences. Those were one on Galil Sewage Corporation, which is located within Israel in the Jordan Valley. That was hit in a cyber attack where attackers targeted a known vulnerability in Israeli-made Unitronics vision controllers. Now, this is something that ends up coming to haunt us much later in the year, where many more of those kinds of controllers are attacked around the world. They're extremely popular with water utilities because they combine a control, a PLC functionality with an HMI, and they have remote capabilities. So you can connect them to the internet and monitor them across the internet. This is effectively the reason why they were so easy to target in these cases. They didn't have enough security protecting them, and they were connected to the internet. So the second incident that caused downtime was related to the same type of controllers. This time late in the year in Ireland, there's a small, tiny county, Bingshamstown Town and Drum. It's a water co-op there. 180 residents lost water when that same controller was attacked. Initially, this looked to be a hacktivist style attack. The first attack on Galil Sewage Corp was by an Op Israel campaign, which is an annual campaign that occurs every year by hacktivists. And later on, we found out that this attack was in fact perpetrated by the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So this became a nation-state attack on water and critical infrastructure. Let's move on. Andrew, did you have anything to say about the rest of this slide, or should we move on to the next one?
No, let's move on. Just a reminder that we're running a little bit late, so let's keep going.
On the next slide, the next thing to talk about is geographies. So very quickly, as has occurred since 2019, since we saw this hockey stick graph, change in incidents on industries in our purview, we have seen that the United States almost always first, then Germany and Canada trading the top 3 spots for countries or geographies most impacted by incidents in this report with physical consequences. Why might this be? Well, all three of these countries have a very large manufacturing base. And, since ransomware is always going to be going after targets with money, they're always interested in getting money. They're criminal organizations. They're always going to be going after countries with that money and with enough targets to go after. So this is why we also see many attacks on other European countries like Switzerland, like the UK, like France, and others in the region. So the key takeaway here is we're seeing more of the same. These trends are not changing significantly. More incidents on the same geographies as years in the past. Why don't we see more incidents in countries like China and Russia, perhaps? Well, there's a couple of reasons. We have very little visibility into public sources of information that we can trust. So sometimes we simply don't know enough about the incidents to be able to count them, and they get discarded. Other times, or other reasons why this is the case, why we don't see incidents in these countries. This is actually the source of most of these attacks, and these ransomware tools and techniques are developed in these countries and sold on the dark web. And thirdly, criminals and groups that are causing cyber attacks can act with impunity in jurisdictions where we cannot go after and prosecute and try and catch these people. And so this is why, we see more attacks coming from there than we see actual attacks in the news being perpetrated against those countries. Next slide, please. Jumping right into the next slide, let's talk a little bit about some of the most high-profile ransomware incidents that we saw in 2023. I'm going to go through them very quickly, and more details are in our report, so please go have a look. Dole, a food company that produces fresh produce, was attacked early in the year in 2023. 4 sites were impacted. This was costly for them. They made an SEC filing. They said that it cost them $10.5 million overall, and roughly half of that, roughly $5 million, was what it cost them to restore operations. The rest were costs in things like produce being spoiled, having to be thrown out, and lost production and lost sales. This led to food shortages. So supply chain problems in the food supply in the United States. The second most high-profile incident that we saw, got a lot of press, was an attack on a pharmaceutical manufacturer in India called Granules India. They reported a quote-unquote significant loss in a national stock exchange filing to their national stock exchange, which is located in Mumbai in India. And what this did is this shut down drug production. How did this happen? If you go back in your mind to the slide we saw before where Andrew was talking about IT dependencies, this is what happened here. When you manufacture drugs, you often have a regulatory requirement to track all the drugs, to make sure that they have a proper lot number, that they're printed on the bottles, that it's stored in a database so that it's traceable. And this is exactly what the CEO mentioned. He said basically regulatory requirements and certification, a recertification in order to basically continue operations is what got them here and caused them such significant downtime, over 40 days downtime. Later on, they backtracked on the costs and they said, at the end of the year, this didn't cost us anything at all. Why would that have happened? Well, because effectively they've made up for lost revenue and for this incident later on in the year. But that doesn't change the fact that this was still a significant incident. And the third one I wanted to quickly mention is a very high-profile attack on MGM Resorts in Las Vegas, famous casino company in America. They lost all their, they lost operations at all their properties in the Las Vegas area. How did this happen? Well, the attackers, ransomware, effectively picked up the phone and allegedly called their help desk and social engineered their help desk into gaining initial access. Once they were able to get a password reset and initial access into their system, they started infecting all their virtual servers with ransomware. These virtual servers do all kinds of things for the business. And one of the things they do is they allow the resorts to program physical room keys and unlock and lock rooms as needed for all their guests. And so what effectively this ransomware attack did is it prevented the resort from allowing customers safe and secure access to all their rooms. This is why this is in our report. Most of the impacts on the MGM attack were actually business and IT incidents, but it affected their building control systems and their ability to secure and run their resorts. Did you have anything to say, Greg, about some other incidents here?
Yeah, there are a few other high-profile incidents, and the new SEC rules are forcing companies to report losses from cyber attacks. And while the companies aren't really elaborating on the details of the attacks, they are reporting costs. And then just a few mentioned here are, well, one that isn't on this chart, but it was a major company that was hit, was Johnson Controls. And they had a $27 million loss as a result of an attack. And Clorox suffered $49 million so far in their attack. And MKS Instruments, there's a $450 million price tag associated with that. And part of it is $200 million of a loss fell to MKS Instruments, and another $250 million hit was the result of MKS not being able to provide product to some of their customers. And Applied Materials came out and said they lost $250 million as a result of MKS not being able to provide product. So, you know, a lot of these incidents are, and there are more incidents out there, but these are just some of the highlights.
If we switch to the next slide, let's talk quickly about supply chain. We haven't seen supply chain attacks for a little while. Most supply chain attacks involve changes to software or changes to products as the result of somebody inserting malware into the supply chain of when products are manufactured. And they are starting to become more concerning. In 2023, we saw two examples of this. One was the Polish National Railway, Polish Rail, or SPS is their abbreviation in Polish, accused a local train car manufacturer and locomotive manufacturer, Newag SA, of sabotaging trains. So how? Why? Well, when Polish Rail has rail cars and locomotives that need service and maintenance, they go to a maintenance shed. And when they got into the maintenance shed and they started working on their new train cars and locomotives, they realized quickly that they were not able to actually move them out of the rail yard once they were done service. And they started looking into why. So they actually paid a third party to do an analysis on the control systems that operate these trains and rail cars, and found out that they had been deliberately sabotaged, or alleged that Newag had deliberately sabotaged their trains so that they could not operate them if they had done their own maintenance. So Newag wanted them to do maintenance and pay Newag to do it. And there was a dispute. Newag claims that it was inserted by an unknown attacker. Either way, there was firmware or changes to the code running their control systems that prevented them from running their rail cars. The second incident of a supply chain attack was a Orca FPV. Orca FPV, they manufacture this small local company in Eastern Europe that makes augmented reality or first-person view headsets. This allows you to fly a drone by putting on a VR helmet, basically. And they accused their own contractor that developed the firmware for their devices of planting a time bomb in their code. What is a time bomb? Well, when a certain date and time is reached, the firmware just simply stops working. So it effectively bricked all their manufactured devices. And the contractor was asking customers, please pay me, and then I'll unlock your hardware that you have bought from Orca. Again, supply chain attack, novel ones in 2023. Did you have anything quickly to say there, Andrew?
I did. I wanted to add, this was, call it a near miss. We didn't even document it in the report, but I'm also the co-host on the Industrial Security podcast. Had an interview recently with Marcus Sachs. He is a professor at Auburn University, and he pointed me at an incident that occurred in the war in the Ukraine. The Russians were invading the Ukraine, tanks were moving back and forth, and the front line of the physical conflict was moving back and forth. When the front line moved back towards Russia, there would sometimes be dead Russian tanks left on the battlefield. And apparently, Ukrainian farmers got the idea to drag these tanks over to the Ukrainian side of the battle. I don't know why. It might have been, I don't know, scrap metal or who knows what. But apparently this annoyed the Russians. And so when the front line moved back the other way, the Russians grabbed these $1 million, Ukrainian John Deere tractors, and took them back into Russia. Well, the Ukrainian owners of these tractors were, of course, unhappy that the Russians had stolen their tractors. And so they called up the vendor. They called up John Deere and said, someone has stolen my $1 million tractor that I bought from you. What can you do for me? And John Deere sent a command through the cloud to turn off all of the stolen tractors. So now, the Ukrainians, the farmers were saying, yay, the Russians can't use our stolen tractors. And, everybody else was going, yay. Just a minute. What just happened here? What would happen if John Deere decided to turn off other people's tractors? What would happen if the Russians broke into John Deere and decided to turn off all of the tractors in North America, during planting season? So this is a sort of a realization that's hit people, that this supply chain thing, it extends into the cloud. We don't really know where this is going to go in the years ahead.
Well, I'm also going to add in terms of supply chain and work and covering the industry. Years ago, asset inventory and visibility were huge issues, but over the past few years, supply chain attacks have been gaining momentum, and more companies are now starting up, and they're focusing on software bill of materials, or SBOMs, to work on solutions to prevent or limit attacks before they end up happening. So I've been out to various conferences over the past few years, and there are tracks totally devoted to supply chain attacks and how we can learn about them and how we can prevent them.
Absolutely, Greg. I look at all these new initiatives to automate cars and taxi services in cities across the world, and everybody is looking for more efficiencies and how to do things a new way. Just this month, the XZ compression library in Linux was found to have a long-term operation to, perhaps by a nation state, to insert a backdoor in their compression library. And this compression library is used throughout the open source software supply chain, and of course in embedded devices that are now being used for automation and control. Huge concerns over supply chain attacks and how they could impact operations. I wanted to quickly shift gears and talk a little bit about transport. One of the most significant things that we've seen in 2023 is the prevalence of GPS jamming and spoofing. In one of the most notorious examples of this was that in August this last year, commercial aircraft in the Middle East began reporting that their GPS signals that they rely on for navigating aircraft in all modern aircraft were starting to receive spoofing attacks. So jamming is where you jam the radio signal, you cannot receive your GPS coordinates, and you may not be able to identify your position. Spoofing is another level of concern because you're not just flying blind now. Now your navigation system, which by the way is all automated, as you can imagine, with an autopilot system, and all kinds of other aircraft systems is now being tricked into thinking it's in one position when you're, on the right course. And in fact, you might be 50 to 200 nautical miles off course. And in certain areas of the world, I'm sure you can appreciate, if you were to fly into airspace or hostile airspace without calling the local air traffic control and asking permission to enter, you are in deep danger. And to make matters worse, some civilian aircraft, and by the way, there was 3 separate incidents where multiple aircraft were impacted in these incidents in the report. They're reporting that they had complete loss of navigation systems in the aircraft and had to take emergency precautions. Some of those precautions include doing things like resorting back to dead reckoning, which means that you're constantly having to ask any air traffic control you can reach by radio, where am I? Where am I going? Help. And you simply just don't fly commercial civilian aircraft without these systems working. There's more in the report. There's sources as well in the Appendix A. If you're interested in what happened here, please go read them. It also impacted inertial reference systems, which are part of the navigation of modern aircraft. They use hybrid systems. So they're not only able to tell the position and heading of the aircraft by traditional sensors like wind and airspeed, but they also are constantly being updated by GPS when a signal is available to augment their accuracy. And when you lose these systems, you're in deep trouble. Andrew, did you have anything else to add? I just wanted to say that these attacks are starting to increase in other areas of the world too. So GPS jamming is a very significant concern because many, many businesses rely on GPS signals, not only for position, like in the transport and trucking industries and logistics industries and shipping, but they also rely on GPS for timing. For example, all substations are going to be using a GPS clock or a satellite clock in order to update the time so that they can operate efficiently with a very accurate time source, and GPS provides this. So if you rely on GPS signals right now in your physical operations, it's very important to make sure that you have a contingency plan, that you have some other source of accurate time besides GPS in case you're subject to GPS jamming and spoofing.
That's right. And I did want to chime in with a couple of other data points. I was at a conference overseas last week. There were people there from the Nordics, and we were talking about this GPS stuff. And they said, yeah, the GPS spoofing, in their experience, is nearly constant everywhere in their nation. They, they look at their GPS trying to drive from one end of the city to the other, and it tells them they're in the middle of the ocean. So that it's become ubiquitous in that geography. GPS jamming is becoming ubiquitous as well. Car thieves all over the world, are buying these $40 and $50 devices, and putting them into the stolen cars so that the owners cannot use the GPS technology in the cars to track this, track down and recover the stolen cars. These cars are driving onto ferries. The stolen cars are being put into trucks, and the trucks are driving onto ferries. Now the jammers in these stolen vehicles are jamming the navigation systems in the ferries. These are passenger ferries that can't use GPS anymore. So, again, be aware that if a control system relies on GPS either for location or for timing, the time has come. We need to reevaluate that kind of control system. We need to make sure that there's contingency plans in place, because this jamming and to a degree the spoofing is becoming ubiquitous.
Volt Typhoon is an attack group that they're based out of, well, it's a People's Republic of China state-sponsored attack group that looks to compromise the environments of multiple critical infrastructure organizations, primarily in communications, energy, transportation, and water and wastewater systems. And the level of, and I say hysteria, but the level of high awareness regarding Volt Typhoon has been unprecedented. I mean, you're seeing security agencies across the globe uniting to ensure that everyone from users and operators to executives understand the threat posed by this group. And much like asset owners need a plan, as we're talking about contingency plans before, but much like these asset owners need a plan to ensure they're on top of the threats from all these technologies, they also need a plan, and everyone has to know what to do if attacked by this actor or others that are similar, because there are plenty of attack groups out there.
Yeah, and so a couple of other things on Bolt Typhoon. One is, the authorities, the intelligence agencies that, brought this to light have concluded that this was a nation state developing the ability to affect operations. So that's disturbing, especially that it hit more than 50 utilities. And the second thing is that the technique the nation state was using is called living off the land. Instead of installing malware that you can see on the machine that antivirus can find, they were just using the tools on the machine already. They had credentials to log in. They looked like any other user logging in and using these machines. It was almost impossible to find these people, which is also disturbing. A lot of us have been relying on our intrusion detection systems, hoping they're gonna save our bacon when the bad guys get in. But this technique is very hard to detect.
Absolutely, Andrew. I just wanted to quickly mention, by the way, beginning with this slide, Volt Typhoon, we're now moving into near misses. So these incidents that we're talking about now did not result in actual downtime or physical consequences. However, they're extremely notable and important to know about in our profession. Maybe we can move on to the next one, Sector Cert.
Sure. This again, I was overseas at the conference back in, I think it was November, when the Sector Cert stood up and released their report and told us about a Russian attack on critical infrastructure providers in Denmark. I had opportunity to sit down with the authors of the report face to face the next day and ask them a few questions. They said this was a Russian attack. And the way the Sector Cert works, the Sector Cert monitors. They put a tap on the internet connection between the internet-facing firewall in these utilities and the internet. So they're not monitoring stuff deep into OT. They're monitoring stuff on the IT to internet interface. They detected this attack exploiting a vulnerability in the Zixel firewall. And reported on it. Two things: they detected a second wave of attack that seemed to be a sort of a second phase of the same attack. Forescout later put out sort of their own report, their own analysis. They did a deeper dive on it, and they came back and said, no, the second attack, the first attack appeared to be, the Russians targeting the critical infrastructure. The second one appeared to be, might still have been by a Russian threat actor, but was part of a much more widespread indiscriminate campaign that was targeting Zixel firewalls all over the world. It did not seem to be in any sense localized or targeted. It was, hitting everybody. Another thing that a lot of readers of the report confused is the term island mode. The term in the electric sector means taking part of the grid offline, disconnecting a chunk of the grid from the main grid. A lot of people interpreted that term to mean this electric thing, and that would be a physical consequence. In fact, I asked this question of the Sector Cert, and they said, no. When we use the word, we mean disconnecting the firewall from the internet. In a sense, islanding the business from the internet so that they had time to go in there and update the firmware in the firewall and kick out the attackers.
Exactly, Andrew. As a former power engineer myself that did a lot of design work, especially with transmission sector, I was curious what they meant by island mode, and I'm glad to have that cleared up. So the begs the question, why does this matter at Sector CERT? Why does it matter? Why are we talking about this here if it seems to have not been that serious and only impacted the IT side of these IT-facing firewalls and internet-facing firewalls? Well, to me, it matters because the sophistication and the determination of the attackers in these two waves, they might have been different attack groups. Both of them were very sophisticated. And this goes back to what Greg was saying earlier about how we're seeing perhaps hacktivist or ransomware and nation-state threat groups trading TTPs, tools, tactics, and procedures. Second, this matters because of the scale of what they targeted. There was over 300 utilities involved in Sector CERT, and at least 22 of these providers were hit in this attack in these two waves. So the scale of it is extremely large, and the large cooperative effort required and put into stopping these attacks in progress was truly impressive, but is one of the reasons why we're talking about this incident. Hats off to these folks. Don't you think, Greg? It just did an amazing job, not only protecting their systems, but reporting on it.
Well, that's the case. I mean, I want to commend the Sector CERT folks because their quick thinking and not being afraid to work long hours were just some of the key attributes that kept the Danish critical infrastructure up and running after these two major attacks. And that success in security is all about collaboration. And everybody was willing to work together. And the case was 22 companies ended up compromised around the same time with possible involvement by state actors. And but at the end of the day, they were able to fight off all these attackers. So, they did a great white paper on the whole attack scenario, and the timeline that they showed was just, first off, chilling, but second off, it was an amazing display of what they could do when they were all working together.
Yeah, and let me add for the record, these folks' job was to detect and alert. That's what they get paid for. When the utilities they alerted said, can you help us with this? They went over and above and said, yeah, we can help you with this. It's not what we're supposed to be doing, but you're in trouble. And they went above and beyond. So let's switch gears. We've been talking about sort of the problems last year. There's a section on the end of the report that talks about sort of new developments in defensive, capabilities, and the first thing in that section is a new initiative called cyber-informed engineering. And in my estimation, this is the most useful, the most important development in OT security since the phrase OT security was coined by the Gartner Group back in 2005. So I think very highly of this initiative, but it's engineering. I mean, Rees, you're an engineer. Can you walk us through this?
Yes, very quickly. The concept of cyber-informed engineering is a coin with two sides. On the one hand, we need to teach young engineers, upcoming engineers, and existing engineers in the field about cybersecurity. And second is that we must do more cybersecurity in all our designs that we have going forward. And one way to think about what cyber-informed engineering is with an example. So imagine that you work in an industrial environment in a room full with steam boilers. These are found in plants all over the place. And imagine you find yourself in a room with a giant steam boiler and you're concerned about your safety. Why? Well, if a cyber attack were to get into the control system that operates this giant steam boiler, how comfortable would you be if an attacker got into the control system and caused an event like an overpressure situation on this boiler, would you trust a spring-loaded mechanical valve or multiple 3, 4, 5 of them redundantly safe to protect you from an overpressure situation? Or would you prefer a longer password on the PLC to protect you from this eventuality of this boiler exploding? Well, there is no strategy, no look into engineering grade protections like these spring-loaded valves in cybersecurity frameworks like the NIST cybersecurity framework or in cybersecurity standards like IEC 62443. It just doesn't exist. Other things that cyber-informed engineering brings to the table are things like, can you operate your systems manually or in hand if your control systems are compromised? Have we practiced this? The engineering profession has been managing risks to public and worker and environmental safety for centuries. And this is the kind of skill set and out-of-the-box thinking that they bring that you may not have present in a traditional cybersecurity program. And so the goal here is not to replace IT or your traditional cybersecurity methods with engineering. It's to collaborate together. How can engineers and IT and cybersecurity folks work together in order to bring about better designs that are safer? Andrew has this great example about, would you trust a bridge? This is all found within a book that we're going to talk about in a moment. But just to quickly finish this slide off, this entire program was created by the Department of Energy in the United States and Idaho National Labs. They've put out several deliverables already that you should know about. Please go and have a look at them. The first one is the National Cyber-Informed Engineering Strategy, the top document you see on the slide. You can download a PDF copy. It outlines what the program is all about. And then they have created an implementation guide. This is a series of questions that design engineers can ask themselves about how to engineer and design more cyber safe and cyber secure systems. And the third deliverable that just dropped as a preview only a month ago is their new CSET tool. This is basically the implementation guide turned into a digital tool. You can download it to your local system and run it. And instead of reading a book, you're now filling out almost like a wizard or a questionnaire digitally, and it will help you in your analysis and design processes.
Yeah, so let me add a couple of things. As Rees pointed out, the engineering grade, the engineering style mitigations don't exist in cybersecurity standards. This is why CIE, was started, is because there are these powerful tools that only exist in the OT space. There's no such thing as an overpressure valve in the IT space. They only exist in the OT space, and they're not being used systematically to address cyber risk as well as other risks. And the good news is that a lot of these things are, in a real sense, unhackable. I think of them as engineering grade. What's the difference between engineering grade and IT grade? Let's look at bridges. I mean, there was a tragedy 2 weeks ago. A bridge in Baltimore collapsed. A ship ran into one of the supports. 7 people died. There's been enormous investigation and debate and interest in what happened there, because this is not supposed to happen. Bridges are not supposed to collapse. When an engineer designs a bridge, we expect that bridge to carry a specified load in a specified operating environment for a specified number of decades with a large margin for error. Imagine that the engineering profession has figured out how to build bridges at 1/3 the cost, suspension bridges at 1/3 the cost of today's suspension bridges. I don't know, imagine they're using carbon fiber or something. But imagine that the new design has a problem. It's riddled with harmonic frequencies. What is that? Well, people with as much gray hair as I do might remember the Tacoma Narrows Bridge disaster in 1940. It was the world's first really big suspension bridge, and the engineers of the day had not figured out harmonic frequencies. A stiff breeze came along, started the bridge oscillating at the right frequency, and it just built up and built up until the bridge tore itself to pieces. Imagine that the new design is riddled with these frequencies. People walking across the bridge is enough to start the bridge vibrating enough, potentially to tear itself apart. And so the engineers of, who are designing this have put active dampers in there, hydraulics, multiply redundant hydraulics, multiply redundant power supplies, multiply redundant control systems, artificial intelligence is controlling the whole thing. How happy would each of us be driving across that bridge to work every day if we knew that the design engineer hoped that if there was a cyber attack targeting the AIs, hoped that we could detect the attack before it crippled the AIs and the bridge tore itself to pieces? How happy would we be driving across that bridge if we knew that the design engineer hoped that if we detected the attack in time, we could scramble an incident response team fast enough to prevent disaster? Hope is not what we expect of the engineering profession. When public safety is at risk, when national security, critical infrastructures are at risk, we expect automation systems to stand up to a specified threat environment until for a length of time, until at least the opportunity, the time comes where we have the opportunity to increase our defenses, because we can change these systems only very slowly, with a large margin for error. This is what we expect when public safety is at risk, and this is the sort of the focus of the cyber informed engineering methodology. Let me jump ahead here. The second thing that we talk about, this is the book that I wrote, came out in November. It is about engineering grade protections. I talk about CIE in the book, but really, I mean, the CIE deliverables, I love the CIE deliverables. As I said, I think it's the most important development in a decade and more. But bluntly, they're written by PhDs. They can be a little hard to understand. And so I wrote Engineering Grade OT Security, a manager's guide, with storytelling sort of as a mode of operation, explaining the concepts in one syllable words, trying to make the whole perspective, the whole approach accessible so that we could, more easily apply it. And, the goal of the book is give enough background that we can dig into the question towards the end of the book. How much is enough? How much engineering? How much cybersecurity for which kinds of systems? And more importantly, why? Why is that enough? And don't get me wrong, I've been, the focus is on engineering grade, but cybersecurity is needed as well. The customers that I work with that use engineering grade protections the most intensely also use cybersecurity protections the most intensely. This is a coin with two sides. You don't spend one side of the coin or the other. You spend the whole coin. We need both of these. But the focus here is on engineering grade because that's the piece that's been neglected.
Well, I'll add, if I can, for a second, that the beauty of this book is, yes, it's a technical background, but it's not purely technical. I mean, you're reading, as Andrew said, I mean, there's some stories in there and that kind of thing. And I was one of the reviewers on it, and I was able to get through it and really, really, truly learn quite a bit about the whole aspect. So. It's quite I mean, I highly recommend it. It's a good read, and it's just a good book.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Rees. Both of you reviewed the book and gave me feedback that was very valuable. Greg, can you tell us a little bit more about your repository, because you've got more in there than we reported on?
Yeah, well, we start, as I said earlier in the webcast, we started the site 3 years ago, and it's essentially, we wrote for last year alone, we had 210 incidents, and of which 68 were physical consequences, but other incidents are in there are just essentially writing about near misses or incidents that happened where security worked, and but there was something that happened, and they're publicly held incidents, so it's not any like deep dark secrets or and that kind of thing. And we cover STRIVE stands for Security Threats, Regulations, Incidents, and Vulnerabilities covered by experts. And we're just looking for incidents that that are occurring throughout any industry within the manufacturing automation sector. So you could go on the site and you can search for industry, you can search for location, you can search for companies, attack groups, and types of attacks. So it's pretty comprehensive. And also within on the site, and while Waterfall has the threat report on their site, we also have it on our site. So it's kind of a mutual agreement there.
Yeah, and let me say a few words about Waterfall. Waterfall is a technology provider. We do OT security technology. We produce, we design, we sell unidirectional security gateways and a whole family of products that are either based on the gateways or that complement the gateways. We've been in business for 17 years. We have offices all over the world. We have installations all over the world. We are trusted by critical industrial infrastructures all over the world. We position unidirectional gateways as network engineering, as engineering grade prevention of the propagation of cyber attacks, from the internet, from IT networks into industrial networks with unacceptable physical consequences of compromise.
We've put a tremendous amount of effort into this report so that you can use this as a tool set in your everyday work as a cybersecurity professional. Again, please go download the report, waterfall-security.com/2024-threat-report. And if you have any feedback as to the accuracy of the information, or you have anything nice or not nice to say about it, we'd love to hear from you. Please write to us. You can see our emails are here on this slide. Again, we produce this report because it's probably one of our most popular and most requested and talked about pieces of content, and we hope that it's value added in your everyday life.
That's what I had. Greg, did you want to say any last words, or should we drive straight into Q&A?
Why don't we just drive straight into Q&A?
All right, Greg and Andrew and Rees, thank you very much. That was very informative and interesting. We had a whole bunch of questions here. I don't think we'll have a chance to get to all of them, but some of the questions here really hit on a good point, and I want to focus on those. So we have one question here, and this person asks, and I don't know the answer to this. Hopefully, you guys do. How does this report define supply chain? Like where's the cutoff? Where do we all know certain things are for sure supply chain. Where is the what's outside the supply chain? Where does that end? Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Let me take a run at it. Supply chain is it's the focus on supply chain kind of was triggered. The big triggering event was SolarWinds, and since then, supply chain has many aspects. One aspect, is are we buying components that we're using in our automation systems? Are we buying those components from trusted suppliers, or are we buying them from suppliers that are in some sense under the influence of governments who might not have our best interests in mind? In some parts of the world, Huawei and ZTE technology has been banned from cell phone networks. This is a sort of a manifestation of that. Do I have trustworthy suppliers? A second sort of aspect of trustworthy supply is, am I buying the components? They appear to have been made by trustworthy suppliers, but am I giving the money to someone who is funneling money to terrorism or to some other nefarious purpose? Again, do I have it's illegal to give money to terrorists, even indirectly, even if you're buying technology from them. In many parts of the world. So that's a second aspect of it. A third part is the software bill of materials, which is to say, I have all sorts of technology in my products. Are there vulnerabilities in any of that? If I have 100 packages in my product and somebody announces a vulnerability somewhere, software bill of materials systems keep track of what's in each of the products, which products are in which systems, and sort of give you a reports or sometimes even real-time alerts saying, hey, a vulnerability was just added to the CBE database. You have 17 systems installed that have that software in there. We don't know yet. No one's told us if that vulnerability can be exploited, but it's there in your source code. And the nastiest one is, the Russians broke into SolarWinds and deposited malware into the software development process so that the security update, the patch, had the malware in it. Oh, there's a sort of that's four. I'm counting. There's a fifth, which is, if you rely on a cloud service as part of the product, and the cloud service has been tampered with, now, like the John Deere scenario, now you can reach into products all over the world. So it means a lot of different things. I don't like using the word malware for all that stuff, or sorry, the word supply chain for all that stuff, but that's what people are doing, right or wrong.
Practically speaking, very quickly, Andrew, I wanted to say that when I'm doing the research, I look for an incident that causes physical consequences, meets our criteria, but most importantly, where there's a threat actor that is inserted, either software or hardware of some kind, into an operational technology, industrial control system that has caused physical consequences. When I see that pattern, that to me is a supply chain attack in the cybersecurity context. Of course, food and goods across the world, that's business. We're not looking into that. We're looking at things that impact control systems.
Okay, couldn't find the unmute button there for a second. Sorry about that. Thanks a lot. That's a good answer, guys. We have a bunch more questions, but I'm looking at all the questions here, and there's one that really caught my eye. And I think the question was, someone misunderstood your thing with the pressure release valve and the long passwords, and they start asking, how complex should passwords be? And then they go, how do we protect utilities against this quantum cyber attack? And more specifically, something where the length of the password is only going to buy you not enough time. Okay, you'll push it off till next week. We're going to need electricity next week. Where does it stand as far as, taking the measures to protect against whenever quantum capabilities roll out and are, inevitably going to be used for cyber attacks?
So I'll quickly take that one. Think about how you can prevent this problem from occurring deterministically. If you have a critical safety system and you're relying on passwords, and there is a risk that that password could be cracked very easily by AI or modern machine learning tools, which are very easy to obtain now, or even if it's encryption systems that are vulnerable to quantum computing type attacks, well, abstract that one level higher, go one level higher. Why are we relying on a password to protect this system in the first place, or encryption? How about protecting the system so that information cannot flow into that network at all, so that we don't have this problem? So think about it from the cybersecurity informed engineering perspective.
Yeah, so let me say a few things there. I'll second what Rees said, but let me blow it up a little bigger. Network engineering prevents the propagation of attacks into sensitive networks. When you have nation-state ransomware coming after us, we need network engineering if the consequences of compromise are unacceptable, and they are in many OT networks, but not all OT networks. But even if the consequences of compromise are unacceptable, even if we have network engineering in place, we still have insiders. The insiders might be deceived into carrying attacks into the site on USBs, on cell phones, on laptops. We still have the occasional malicious insider. And so what we have to do, and this is, in the book, it's in the cyber informed engineering, you have to evaluate not just the threat, but you've got to evaluate the credibility of the threat. each of the individual threat vectors, each of the targets, you got to look at a little bit of a bigger picture. And coming back to the quantum, the question most people ask about quantum is encryption. If you see messages flying by on the internet, it's theoretically possible, at least, that some of those messages could be decrypted by a quantum computer. The specific example that came here was passwords. And you can only use a quantum computer on a password if you have sort of another representation of the password. If you've stolen the password hash, you might be able to turn it back into a password with a quantum computer. If you're just looking at a keyboard, a quantum computer won't help you guess what the password's supposed to be. You need a little bit more. So again, it depends on your threat actor. A quantum computer is not going to do an insider, a disgruntled insider, any good who's trying to guess the admin password, because they don't have the information that the quantum computer needs. So it's, I don't know, that's a fancy way of saying it's complicated. Greg, did you want to weigh in on that?
I'm good. I mean, it's complicated is the answer. So
Okay, thanks very much, guys. We don't have time for any more questions. We have literally a dozen questions that came up. Those are the only two that seem to have been asked a few times, as well as that we have time for. Thank you, everyone that joined in today for the listening in on this webinar about the 2024 Threat Report. We'll send you a copy, a link that goes to the recording of the webinar today, in case you missed anything or if you want to share it with someone. And we're also going to send you a link where you can provide a little bit of feedback on what you want to see more, what you want to see less of. Any kind of feedback is welcome. And of course, if you want to discuss your specific situation of how Waterfall might be able to help you secure your industrial site or whatever it is that you're doing, there's a link there where you can have a rep contact you, and they'll be more than happy to listen to what it is you need and see if it's something that we can address. Rees, Andrew, Greg, thank you so much for a very informative webinar. And I'll see you guys. I guess I'll see you next year. It's become something we do every year.
Indeed.
Have a good
Thank
one.
you, Jonathan. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Rees. Let me add. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for your questions. I am personally determined to get answers to each of you for each of your questions. It might take a few weeks, though. I'm in a hotel room right now. I'm on the road, and I am for the next several weeks. But once things settle down again, sort of into the month of May, please look forward to an email. And I welcome an opportunity to explore these issues that you're raising in your Q&A.
Thanks, everybody.
thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Have a good one.